Have you ever wondered how the greatest musicians develop such deep, compelling interpretations? What goes into shaping their artistry beyond just the technical mastery? If you've ever questioned how to bring more depth, intentionality, and connection into your playing, this episode is for you. My guest today is violinist Nancy Zhou. She has spent her career exploring these very questions. Her journey is filled with curiosity, artistry, and lifelong learning. And in our conversation, she shares insights that is going to challenge and inspire the way you approach your own music making. Whether you're refining your technique or searching for a deeper artistic voice, this conversation is going to give you new tools to rethink your approach to music making. You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, and this is episode 217. Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, where we dive into the world of mindful music making, peak performance, and crafting a purpose-driven life and career. I'm your host, violinist, certified performance and life coach for musicians, and your guide to unlocking your full potential, Dr. René Paul Gauthier. Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing wonderfully well as you're tuning into this episode. I am beyond excited to welcome an extraordinary artist today, violinist Nancy Zhou. Known for her probing musical voice and searing virtuosity, Nancy seeks to invigorate appreciation for the art and science of the violin. Her thoughtful musicianship and robust online presence resonate with a global audience in such a way that brings her on stage with leading orchestras around the world. More than 20 years since her orchestral debut, Nancy has collaborated with the Royal Stockholm Philharmonic Orchestra, Munich Symphony, Hong Kong Philharmonic, New Jersey Symphony, Naples Philharmonic, and the San Diego Symphony, among others. She's a passionate soloist who cherishes chamber music collaborations and commits to the responsibility of education. Nancy has performed at festivals including Verbier, Tongyang, and Marvara Festival. She's a regular guest educator at various international summer festivals, holding not only master classes, but also workshops on fundamental training and well-being for musicians. Her debut album, Stories Retraced, features 4 seminal and connected works for solo violin, including Bela Bartok's Sonata. The CD releases this season with Orchid Classics. Born in Texas to Chinese immigrant parents, Nancy began the violin under the guidance of her father. She went on to study with Miriam Fried at the New England Conservatory while pursuing her interest in literature at Harvard University. She now is an associated artist of the Queen Elizabeth Chapel and professor of violin at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. In our conversation, Nancy shares how she approaches mindful practice, the role of body mechanics in technical mastery, and the deeper artistry that goes into shaping a truly compelling performance. We discuss the connection between score study and musical storytelling, the role of body mechanics and neuroscience in violin technique, the personal inspiration behind her upcoming album, and a simple but powerful mindset shift that can transform how you approach your instrument every day. Nancy is such an inspiring musician and educator. She has a rare depth of insight, and I know you're going to walk away from this episode with fresh perspectives on both music making and personal artistry. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Nancy Zhou. Let's go to the show. Nancy Zhou, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Renee.
I've been a fan for a long time. You have such an amazing presence on Instagram. I've enjoyed your videos, and the playing is exquisite, of course, but what I really appreciate is the insight that you share, how thoughtful you are, how methodical in a really caring way about creating music. And I'm just so excited about this conversation. So I'm going to start with the question I asked to all of my guests is, please tell us about how your musical journey has unfolded.
It's in some ways oddly kind of unconventional, but conventional. So conventional in the sense that I started with my father, who, trained as a violinist and was an immigrant from China, came in the 80s, landed a job at the San Antonio Symphony. So that's where my hometown is. And of course, he took it upon himself saying, well, the only thing he could teach me is the violin. So that was the one activity that really defined my childhood since the age of 4. And of course, admittedly, I hated practicing when I was young. But my dad being a strict disciplinarian, he kind of just encouraged me, guided me day by day with a few minutes here and there, until I fell in love with the instrument finally at the age of 13. And again, admittedly, that was because I entered my first international competition, and I would say it's very hard to say that I'm a competitive spirit, but I just love the thrill of seeing others play who are incredibly hardworking and very inspiring. So it was my first time being exposed to global players who had the same kind of dedication. So there was that resonance in that way. So for me, it was that point that really defined my passion for music. And then ever since then, it's become sort of my main form of escapism from sometimes reality. And my love for music has grown into different directions. So I'm based here in San Francisco now, having been here for like 5 years or so. I've traveled quite a lot, lived in different places, including New York, which is kind of the hub for musicians in the US at least. I studied in Belgium as well with one of my absolute favorite violinists, Augustin Dumay. So that was a dream come true. I went to NEC prior to that, New England Conservatory, studied with Miriam Fried, who was also one of the most venerated professors and such a great, brilliant mind. And I learned so much from her. So it's been kind of a journey, that takes just many turns here and there. Yeah.
Yes, as they all do, right?
Yeah.
Nancy, I was really excited to see that you've been recording an album that I think is set to be released very soon in June, I think you said.
Yeah, June 6th.
And so I thought, oh my goodness, we absolutely have to talk about this, because that process of preparing for a recording, the practicing involve the, conditioning for performance, because a recording requires so much focus. A concert, you go in and you need, 90 minutes of focus, but a recording is hours and hours. It requires a different kind of stamina. And I thought it would be so interesting for the listeners, first of all, to know that there's an album coming so that they can get ready and acquire it, but also to hear about your process preparing for this.
Yeah, this was really nothing short of a miraculous experience in the sense that, of course, it was my very first time being in the studio for that long. And when I say that long, it was around 4 to 5 days in total. I recorded my album at the Skywalker Ranch up in Northern California, just right across the Golden Gate Bridge. So first of all, the environment was nothing short of just being absolutely perfect and kind of a paradise. So immediately when you go in, you already feel like you're in a focused headspace. So that really helped the environment. The recording process itself I actually have to admit that I found it incredibly fun. I was quite nervous going in before just because of the unfamiliarity of it. But, the first hour in, and I was like, oh, actually, this is just really not very different from heightened mindful practice in the sense. It is kind of a experimentation in the sense that, of course, you have to walk in very prepared, prepared in the sense that you're performance ready for all the pieces that you're recording. But it's a very different process in the sense that, what I did was I ran through a particular movement. I would go into the playback room, and then the first moment where I heard myself in the best represented way possible, because that's what a recording does, ideally, it was an odd mix of, oh, this is what I sound like. Okay, so this is what this is my strength, this is my weakness, because I'm so used to, practicing and recording practice clips on an iPhone, which is nowhere near a professional recording studio. But I think because I had that practice of recording myself practicing, I was kind of primed for the experience. So it didn't take much longer for me to just be completely comfortable with the idea. So anyway, I would go into the playback room and then I would hear myself, and then my analytical mode mindset would kick in, and I would just say, okay, this is, because I'm very clear intention with what I want to sound like for a particular piece, that I would just make those adjustments come the next time I go into the studio after hearing myself in playback. So simply put, it's just kind of a fun process of practicing in a pressured environment, because you have to deliver results right after you hear yourself. So you have no time to kind of experiment, as you would when you're practicing regularly. But then again, as I said, you walk in already prepared, so that work itself is already done. So what comes next in the studio room is just to really have fun and test out all the options that you have in your mind, and create. So it's a space to create, basically. And ironically, they say it's a space to recreate what you have prepared, so vigorously. But I think you have to have that spontaneity and that resilience. So I learned an incredible amount of just balancing that. Yeah.
I love hearing about that. On your website, we can see that you're also a very busy teacher, and we can see the amount of, to use the word you just use yourself, mindfulness, you bring in your own practice. So I think the listeners would probably like to hear more about, you said the heightened mindful practice. Mm-hmm. What does that look like for you, that process of taking a piece from maybe laying eyes on it for the first time to bringing it to performance ready? What is mindful practice? What does that look like for you in the practice room?
When you think about it, maybe from what you read from my website and also all the practice postings that I do, I'm incredibly organized, but I'm actually not very organized. I do have a certain formula that I like to follow, which is basically if I start a piece anew, I always look at the full score. I mean, other than, in the cases of solo works, but if I'm practicing a concerto or especially a chamber work, it's just so important to look at the bigger picture, or we call it the aerial view, to understand first of all, what the instrumentation is, because when you know exactly what the instrumentation is and what each instrument plays, you get a sense of the sound world and the texture of the work, and you also then are able to make more informed decisions about what mode of playing you're experimenting with, because there are different modes, right? And of course, not getting into the technical terms of like dynamics or even sound color, but what we're talking about is just simply put, are you primary? Are you secondary? Are you texture? Are you providing rhythm? Are you providing ornamentation? Are you melody? Just certain things like that really help shape the palette of sound colors that you want to use. So I think it's important to look at the full score, understand the form, the structure of a work, how it's written, because usually form discloses a lot about how a story is being delivered. Once you understand the form, then you understand the content that lies within the outline of the form, which is the story itself. So for me, it's all about seeing myself as in a performer being a storyteller, and then thinking even about the most, sometimes it almost feels like we take these things for granted, but how you present yourself on stage, and I don't mean it in a theatrical way, but kind of seeing the way you deliver a piece and your body language and how that figures into how a listener would perceive and hear a body of work. And I think all of those answers really lie in the score and your knowledge of the composer's life. Why did he write the piece? And once you understand that, you take the framework of the basic elements of music, which is rhythm, melody, harmony, stuff like that, and try to form the most compelling way to tell a story. So I mean, it's kind of a loaded answer, but I would say, really knowing how to score study, which is something that I learned only when during my first year of college, really, because back then with my father, he was much more about kind of building up the technical foundation and exploring colors of sound. So I had all of this potpourri of tools, but I didn't really know how to apply things until I really, I entered the New England Conservatory, and Marian Fried was all about this, analysis of the score and beyond that. So, so I think score studying is good. I am not against recordings. Listening to recordings, I think it's a great resource. And I do think it expands one's horizons as a listener. But what I do discourage is not to focus on just one recording. And usually we are quite fortunate in this day and age where the discography or the anthology of available recordings for basically all the standard concertos is just numerous, right? So you can listen to not only your favorite artists, but also maybe artists you're not very familiar with, and kind of just sense, what is available out there for the, how are they interpreting it, and why are they interpreting it this way? And it all points back to the score, because everyone ideally, looks at a piece of music and it's the same score that we're usually consulting. And so, I would say listening to recordings just, if only for the reason of understanding how things come together orally and not trying to listen to the soloist's interpretation, and much more so just, the actual work and what it sounds like. Attending live performances are great, and just generally being a well-rounded musician and being an artist and, reading books on the composers and all of that. So it's kind of a lifelong journey. There's no one full formula. Yeah.
I love that. Another thing I love about you is your ability to deconstruct the processes of executing movements on the violin, or technical elements. And you have, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have a love for do-ness in all of these exercises. So what would you recommend for the people listening how can they approach technical difficulties, and how can they go about improving that aspect of their playing?
That's a very, very good question. And unfortunately, there's no easy answer to this. I think the baseline comparison that I think might help is to really see musicians as athletes, right? So we are athletes. I mean, because obviously we are also very different from athletes because we're exercising our creative and artistic faculties, but even you can argue that athletes are creative in a way with their body. So at the end of the day, you're working on an instrument in a sense where the instrument, and this is a very cliche statement, but it's an extension of your body. What I found has been incredibly helpful for me is to think of how, as opposed to thinking of how your body can conform to the instrument, actually thinking of it in the reverse way, how an instrument can conform to your body. So understanding how one's body works, which is essentially a system of, mobile joints, and it's a system of springs. And we are not born tense. If you think about a child who is brought into this world, usually a child is very, when they are walking age, let's say a toddler or so, that they have this natural ease with their body. And it's only when we start entering adulthood that we encounter people who suffer from tension or, rigidness. And so I strongly believe that when we're young, we have this intuitive sense, and it's also extends into the mental when we say, oh, you have to bring out your inner child, right? So it's just going into adulthood and then experiencing the stress of life in general, that we start losing that control. And I even think that the way we think about control nowadays is to micromanage everything, micromanage every muscle, and thinking that we have we have to work hard in order to produce results, and that's not exactly the case, according to my experiences. So I think being in tune with your body, focusing on training for, refining that flexibility, whether it's through exercising, physical exercise, I find is incredibly important. And it can be in the form of yoga or Pilates or anything, but just that physical well-being, you have to work with a good foundation before you actually start working on the instrument. So, and the reason why I adored Dunas is because, he's very well versed in neuroscience, and he talks a lot about kind of the mental backing behind all the physical motions that are required for violin playing. And it's like the theme of your podcast, right? Mind over finger, and understanding that not all motions are equally active, equally effortful, and that with every active motion that you put in, it's a bit like breathing. There's always a rebound passive motion, right? And that's the same with violin playing, and beyond that, music making, right? Because we don't want to hear music that is stifled and monotonous. And when we're talking about things like that, like all the negative adjectives that we associate with bad so-called violin playing or music making, you start to understand that it just means that you have to breathe when you make music. And when you listen to really great music making, it's dynamic. In the figurative sense, there are a lot of colors, and it sounds like not only a human voice. I mean, that's, many people say, okay, the violin was created to mimic the human voice, and there's some truth behind that, but there's also the speaking quality, the articulation. So speech and singing, thinking much more deeply into that has really helped me understand that, you have to free up the body. You have to see it as a balanced state in order to achieve what you want, here. And also really investing that time. I think no matter at what stage we are in our lives as musicians, and not only limited to, younger days of your life focused on fundamental training, that there is that maintenance issue that we deserve, and we're responsible to maintain a certain shape, and to not overlook that, the kind of what we call mechanical, which I also find kind of misleading. If you put your mind to exercises, a really monotonous mechanical exercise can actually be quite fun. It's just really depends on attitude. So I think just really preserving that plasticity in your mind helps in the long run, because this is a continuum of learning. It shouldn't be results driven. I mean, results come in the way, but those are things that should help bolster and further develop your learning curve.
Yeah. So a lot of inner exploration and reflection. And when you were speaking, I was thinking of finding the ease in the movement.
Yeah. That's incredibly important. That I guess if there's a blurb that I would offer to listeners, it would be that musical tension doesn't mean physical tension, and that's something that it takes a bit of time to actually realize. And then there is a distinction between effort and tension. And this is really thanks to Jennifer Johnson, whose book, she wrote a book which has kind of a wordy title, but it's basically what every violinist needs to know about the body. That's like the title. It's very verbose.
Yes.
But
and she has an interview here on the podcast. So
amazing. Yeah, I admire her so much. I don't personally know her, but I've just read that book, and it's been quite life-changing alongside my readings of Dunas's essays, and also just exploring his big collection of exercises and whatnot. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, she came and worked with my clients inside of the Music Mastery Experience a few times, and she is really wonderful. So I highly recommend the book, and I forget what episode she's in, but I'll put that in the show notes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So how would you say, let's say you're guiding a student through a technical difficulty, they're experiencing some struggles with learning a passage. What would that look like if you're guiding them through a process of understanding what's happening and eventually towards the mastery of this passage?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Usually, I get very hyper analytical. So when I see a student, for example, in a lesson, and they encounter this technical hurdle, immediately what I observe is their response, their initial gut response. And usually what I see is, there's a bit of a grimace in their face and there's like this bracing of the body. So you can already see that there's tension. And usually that's the culprit, right? And then what you try to do is ask them, how are they actually feeling during the moment of making that blunder? And then you ask them, do you have an idea of what the problem is? And most of the time, to my own amusement, they would say no. So it's kind of it's a negative feedback loop of I have to fix this, but I don't know how to fix it. But I'm just going to tense my body so in the hopes that it will be fixed, right? So that's one thing I've noticed, and to try to just start from the baseline of being completely relaxed. Because what happens is that it also encourages the mind to think a little bit more dispassionately, because usually it's the emotions that are kicking in and the drive for perfection that obstructs a student from thinking very objectively. And then trying to, if they don't understand what the problem is, then it's my job to kind of diagnose that and try to pinpoint that source. And oddly enough, sometimes the problem is obscured by other, because there is the issue of independence between the left and right hands and left and right sides of the body. Sometimes what we think would be a left hand issue is maybe not so much the source of the problem, but rather the right hand aggravating something and triggering a response from the left hand. And, one of the most popular common problems is if we speed up the bow for something, the vibrato spazzes out, so that basically it just underscores what I was just saying, that there's no independence yet between the two hands. So it's just really playing the doctor, playing the therapist and the doctor in a certain way. And I mean, I love both roles because it's just, maybe, I don't know, it has something to do with my odd fascination with like sci-fi psychological thriller movies since when I was young, and just understanding, how the human mind works, because we share the same minds at the end of the day, biologically speaking. So so that's kind of a rough idea of how I would approach it.
I love this. I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to hear more about that CD though. And so you talked about going in the studio and you're creating, but there's also the whole creation of the concept in the selection of repertoire. And I know that there's a special story around your choice of repertoire for this CD. I'd love to hear about that part of the creation process.
Yeah. It's the story is comprised of many threads. The first thread of which is that, well, first of all, just as background, I've always been a little bit, how should I say, disinclined towards recording, because it's just out of insecurity purposes and also being overly critical. But it kind of happened when I was thinking about my mother being a folk minority dancer. That's what she did before she gave birth to me, and kind of there was this big inflection point in my life where I was trying to make sense of what do I have to offer as a musician, because the industry is oversaturated with so many violinists and musicians and whatnot, all trying to make a stance for themselves, right, and tell their stories. And so I was just thinking deeply, and I started realizing that even if it was a subconscious thing, that my musicianship is really informed by my fascination with dance. That probably has a lot to do with my mother, and even during my childhood, who would I've actually never seen her dance, only, video footages and photographs, because this is many decades ago. But just having that fascination and understanding just, what we were talking about, mindfulness and choreographed movement, that all actually comes together beautifully. And then I was like, okay, well, I want to definitely record an album that pays tribute to that. And then I was racking my brain. So it was like, okay, maybe I was thinking about some of the pieces that have really accompanied me throughout the last decades or so, and that the 4 pieces that are on the album are basically those pieces, right? So there's the Bartók Solo Sonata, which I had an obsession with already since a decade ago, but just never really plucked up the courage to study because it has a bit of a reputation of being, incredibly difficult, which it is, and it's Bartók's music. But I'm also of a personality where I feel like the harder something is, the more I'm attracted to it, if it's for certain reasons that particularly resonate with me. And Bartók is one of my absolute favorite composers because, obviously you probably know a little bit of background with him. He was a synthesizer of the East and West, Western art techniques, art music techniques, and with the Eastern kind of the musical language of pockets of people that you would normally not really be exposed to, at least city dwellers like us, right? And that particularly resonated with me because probably my mother was also from that minority group in China called the Boyan people. So I had a fascination with, the unfamiliar. And Bartók was also the composer who really taught me how to articulate. I thought a lot about how to sing because I love listening to opera singers. My favorite is obviously Maria Callas and Mirella Freni, and Pavarotti. So just kind of understanding, the other side of music making, which is speech related. So that's really, the Bartók Solo Sonata is one of the cornerstones of the album. And then the 3 other pieces, basically it's just a medley of things that I really love, right? So there's Isai's 4th Sonata, which I've explored for so many years already. And because it was dedicated to Chrysler, who is also one of my absolute favorite violinists, I just felt like it had to be there on the album. And then I also have Chrysler's Recitative and Scherzo Caprice, which was just about a couple of years back. He dedicated that piece to Isai, right? So there's that nice tribute to musical friendship between the 2 pieces. And then last but not least, there's the Bach First Partita. And I chose the First Partita because of it's the most, what I would say, variation is at the foreground, right? So this idea of variation, not only in music, but also in life, how we can be so different, yet be from the same fabric, as humans. So it just felt inevitable that it had to be in there as well. So, the general mission statement for me is, for this album is that it's a response to the question of what it means to be human, our fascination with variety, with variation, our fascination with storytelling, because, that's what really drives humankind forward. We always tell stories, right? And then my fascination with folk music as well. And folk music is very special in the sense that it's delivered orally, right? And if we talk about the field studies that Bartók did, not only in Eastern Europe, in his native country of Hungary, but also even in Africa, for example, in Egypt, right? He studied the musical language of the Arabs, right? So it's very fascinating for me to kind of just grace that territory a little bit more and understand that classical music, it was born from folk music. Mm-hmm. Bach had a fascination with folk music and the traditional dance forms of, the saraband initially came from Spain. Right? It's not, and then it was later co-opted by the French and made into this more high-end, courtly dance. But all music at the end points towards that really deep-set origin of music. music making within the peasants, and yeah, so it's just very, very fascinating.
Thank you for sharing. I really love how there's this very personal fiber of yours that's being woven in all of these selection.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really can't wait. So, I mean, the way I see it is that, fittingly, the title of the album is Stories Retraced. So I basically am seeing myself as, there's a special term that my cover art photographer used, which I absolutely was like, actually, this is very perfect, the way he describes it. So he describes me as a raconteuse, a storyteller. And I'm basically telling the stories of these 4 different composers who are in some ways so inextricably linked together in the Western music canon, of course. But also the beautiful byproduct is, this is that maybe listeners will be able to get a glimpse of, what my voice is as well. But that's just the byproduct. So the main mission is really to tell as compelling of a story as possible for these pieces that are so popular amongst the Western canon repertoire.
I love hearing this background information because it's going to make me listen to the CD completely differently now that, I understand, you talked about the importance of understanding the composer's intention but I find it so fascinating to hear also the musician's intention and personal story with pieces, and it makes us listen to their performance differently because now we feel like we have this connection with them. So this is great.
That's really the most important thing as an artist to foster connections and to nurture because of connections, right? I mean, music is about connection, and it can be, from past deceased composers, but also even contemporary composers, and just seeing yourself as a mere dot of that continuum of art making is, for me, an incredibly beautiful thing.
Oh, I love this. Nancy, we're going to cover all of the information of where people can find this at the end. And before that, can I maybe take you through a little rapid fire round of questions?
Blast away.
So before the interview, I talked to you about one of my favorite questions that I don't get to ask a lot on the podcast. So I will ask you, if there's a thought or a belief that has changed your life, or maybe a thought or belief that supports you.
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of already hinted at it, but who was it? I believe Louis Armstrong, who talked about how all music is folk music. So that's basically the most pithy statement that has changed my life. Yeah.
I think people would be upset if I don't ask you if you have a favorite tool in the practice room.
Oh, the score. I mean, I don't really, I don't, usually probably the standard answer is like a metronome or a pencil, or I don't know what it could be. But yeah, my favorite tool is definitely having the full score to any work other than solo works. But then in the case of solo works, especially with Bach, then try to get a manuscript copy.
Yes. Oh, I love this answer. Another question I love is what makes practicing most enjoyable for you? Because I'm always, I strongly believe that practicing, of course, we want to be present, we want to solve problems, and we have very specific goals that we're trying to accomplish. But I feel like when we can find ways to make that meaningful, enjoyable, personal, then the results start happening faster. So I love asking this question. Is there something that makes practicing more enjoyable for you?
Yes, seeing practice as a big question mark, and that is defined by asking why. So always ask why. Whether it's when you encounter a problem, you ask why. Why is this happening? And why am I standing there right in front of, here and now and looking at the score? It's just kind of being as present as possible, and being as mindful as possible, because yes, of course, sometimes it might send you down rabbit holes, but I do think that a little dose of obsession is always really good. We
I
can
love
use
that.
nowadays
A
with
little
short
dose.
attention spans.
Yes, a little dose of obsession. And the listeners can't see. And I'll show you later though. I have the word why in the little frame up here that
Oh,
my daughter
amazing.
drew.
Oh,
And then last question before the actionable tip. What is a habit that you have that you think is contributing to your success?
oh, that's very difficult. First of all, I mean, I mean this pretty genuinely. I'm not sure if I am successful. I mean, I feel like it's just kind of a ongoing journey, which I find is maybe the most successful thing. I think my love for music is at this point quite insatiable. So maybe that's the habit, to foster. It's a muscle. There's this one particular speaker from the UN. Actually, I'm not going to get into politics, obviously. But, she talks about. I'm not going to name her either. She talks about how hope is a muscle that needs to be exercised, and I think that is entirely true for passion as well. As cliche as it sounds, like the habit of supporting and fostering that passion daily, because passion can just like a flame, just fade away. If you encounter some external factors that life presents you, and you feel like, oh, your career is not going that well. Well, your career is not going to go anywhere if you don't have love, genuinely speaking, for music. So I think keeping up the hope and passion and thinking of them as muscles that need to be trained by the day is, it's probably I would just. It's probably, I don't know if that's a good response.
Oh, no, are you kidding? I think that's one of my favorite responses to that question ever. I absolutely love that.
Thank you.
And I think it makes it hard to move to the actionable tip because it feels like you took us somewhere so profound and important that now we're falling back to more, um, you know, down to earth things. But, and I don't want to lead you, but maybe that could be the actionable tip.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to keep it, because I mean, everything is action, at the end, even mindset is as well. So,
Yes. And I think that taking the time to think about that, how we can foster more passion in our life, how we can, you know, strengthen that bond, that love for music that we have.
hmm hmm and I mean, if anything, I would elaborate on that a little bit, where I feel like, because this industry, especially amongst violinists, I just noticed that there's so much competitiveness, and at the verge of being a little bit hostile, and kind of, there's a bit of protectionism around itself because of just being human and insecure about certain things. That I think it's important to, just like hope being a muscle, passion being a muscle, is to go out there, even if you don't feel comfortable, support your colleagues, go to their concerts. That's something that I've been quite fortunate to start learning how to do more across the years, and that is because it's just the love for music is so, again, unquenchable, that you start realizing that we are all part of music making, and it's not that we're trying to fight for tiny breadcrumbs to make a name for ourselves, because that's just about yourself, and you're just using music as a vehicle for success rather than actually really finding meaning in music and understanding that there's just so much beauty available. So I think taking that extra investment of time and energy, I've had those moments where I feel like, I don't really have time to go to this concert or not. But actually, when you do make that effort, you do feel like, for the most part, even if it's a bad concert, I feel like people try to give their best. And that's something that is incredibly meaningful. So having that level of empathy, I think, is important and can pay so many dividends in the long term.
That's so beautifully said. Speaking of another sentence that changed my life is by Shakti Gawain. I love her book, Creative Visualization. And with that comes is, I used to listen to it on the CD of affirmations. And on it, there's a sentence, this is an abundant universe and there's plenty for all of us.
Mm.
And this was back when I was like very early on after finishing school and turning professional. And there was for sure, yes, that sense of scarcity where there's only so many jobs and so many of us.
Yeah.
And I feel that hearing the sentence, and I listened to that CD a lot, but even I'll remember that listening to it for the first time, and I feel like it like broke my heart open, and it made me feel so safe, and it made me feel like there's a different way to see this whole thing. And so for me, that sentence, this is an abundant universe and there's plenty for all of us, has been really, I would say, pivotal and important in everything that's happened since then. And I feel like in the spirit of what you shared, if all of us had a little bit more of this as a mentality, like really amazing things could happen.
That's very beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Where can the listeners find everything about you?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, probably my website, which is, by the way, being revamped. So I'll have a newly refurbished website by April. But, you know, so far what I have now, which is basically a cheap Wix website that I made myself, you can find all the postings about, you know, upcoming performances. And I've been not doing a great job on keeping up to date my blog postings, but Instagram is kind of a good social media handle that I regularly post on and share my thoughts. And then just be on the lookout for the album. Yeah, I can't wait to share it with everyone.
Sounds great. Nancy, thank you so much again. I've loved our conversation and the insight that you share. And I think everyone can sense your love of music. And I know everyone's going to walk away very inspired.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot. Thank you, Renee.
And there you have it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share with your friends and colleagues. Take a screenshot, post it on social media, and tag me. I'm Mind Over Finger everywhere. I always love hearing your favorite takeaways. And if you're ready to take your playing career to the next level, I'd love to invite you to join the Music Mastery Experience. This is my signature group coaching program where we're going to dive deep into building your confidence and mastery and set you up for success and fulfillment in your life and career. You can find all the details at mindoverfinger.com. While you're there, check out the free downloads and online courses available to support your journey even further. And don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter so you never miss an update or a tool to help you thrive. Again, thank you for being here. Until next time, much love and à bientôt.